Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining me today in a wizard's guide to security in the cloud. Now, my name is Elle Marquez, and I am a security and Linux advocate at Intezer. But one thing you may not know about me is that I am a wizard. Don't believe me? Well, let me prove it to you. You see, as a wizard, I've been able to craft my skills throughout different parts of the technology world. As a Linux system admin, I learned spells that help me craft entire environments that help multi-million-dollar companies carry on their business. Then I went on to build the cloud itself from these chunks of metal, which I believe you all call servers. I went on then to teach one of the most difficult spells out there, Defiendo. And the reason that it's difficult is because it allows you to precisely sever applications and put them into small potion bottles or containers. And this is a critical spell because if it was cast incorrectly, it could mean the death of your application. And well, everybody has a podcast, so why not me too? And to this day, I will tell you that I crafted no spells in order to be successful there. What you really need to know about me is that I'm a huge nerd and I'm a big Harry Potter fan. When I was putting this all together, someone told me, you might as well put your qualifications in there, your certifications, so that they know that they can believe you. I don't think it's that important and it's there if you need it. I think you need to believe me because what I'm telling you is the truth. And you're seeing it out there already if you just open your eyes. Another thing I do need to warn you about, though, is that this talk is going to be cheesy. And when I mean cheesy, I mean as bad as the photo there you're seeing. And no, I didn't create this, so credit where credit is due. I found it on the internet. The reason that I've done it this way, though, is that somebody's going to ask you, how did that webinar go? Did you learn anything? And you're going to say, you cannot believe the cheese that was delivered there. I mean, let me show you this example, or let me tell you this example. And that's when you're going to know that because of the cheesiness, you were able to remember the points that were talked about here today. So let's jump right in to our agenda. Now, our agenda is going to be simple today. We're going to talk about Death Eaters. We're going to talk about Horcruxes. We're probably going to need to drop the Harry Potter reference for a minute. What we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about attackers in the cloud. We're going to talk about persistence, and we're going to talk about a way to protect our environment. Kicking off with attackers in the cloud. The photo that you see here came from the Second Wizarding War, where a couple of Death Eaters came in and they destroyed the Millennium Bridge. From there, they went on to ransack an ice cream parlor. I mean, it made no sense. So what does that have to do with the attackers in your cloud? Well, sometimes these Death Eaters, sometimes our attackers go in and they're targeted. They attack one thing with a specific goal, like the bridge. And other times they come in and they just ransack things and it doesn't seem like they have a purpose. And that's because when it comes to our attackers, we always try to plan for the worst. We try to plan for the Death Eaters, the individuals who are going to come in with persistence. They're going to come in specifically to breach us for our data, specifically to breach us for proprietary information. But this isn't always the case. Sometimes they're just bored teenagers. They're someone who is looking to make a name for themselves, somebody who stumbled across a new attack that they could use and they found information about your company and it made it a target for them to practice on. Now, their attacks can be just as detrimental as one of an advanced persistent threat. Though sometimes the attack does come from that notorious actor. You know, we are at war with these Death Eaters, these cyber criminals. We actually call it cyber warfare. And in September, InfoSec magazine came out and published an article that said 71% of CISOs believe that cyber warfare is an issue for their organizations. Yet 22% said they didn't really have an idea. They didn't really have a strategy in place in order to be able to protect themselves. This issue isn't going away. In the previous decade, our researchers have found several large advanced persistent threat campaigns, and these campaigns are targeting Linux specifically. Now, Linux makes up a majority of the cloud. The last statistic I saw was 96%, and I'm sure that it's gone up since then. If names like Trula or Sophacy or APT29 strike fear in your heart, there's a reason for it. And that's because, as you can see, the threats, the attacks, they're growing not only in number, but in efficiency. I'm not going to go into it, but I'm sure that you saw it in the news recently. Now, after reading the abstract for this talk, you probably thought that you were coming in here to talk about the way that attackers stay in our environment, the way that they have persistence through perhaps hiding in the temp directory, or perhaps adding things to our cron tabs. But that's where we go wrong. We focus so much on the huge picture that we've already seen that we stop thinking about the things that we haven't seen. I mean, we didn't see Evil Gnome. We didn't see, let's see, Hidden Wasp before now. So we didn't have things in place to protect ourselves from them. What we need to think about is the way that attackers are maintaining persistence in our systems without us even knowing. And the way we're going to talk about those today is we're going to talk about them as Horcruxes. Is that the way you say it? We're going to go with that. If you didn't watch Harry Potter or somehow got away from not being in Harry Potter mania, Voldemort, who was the bad guy in the story, was able to create persistence in the world by severing his soul into 6 unique parts and hiding them within 6 items. We'll go into that in a bit. What does this once again have to do with cyber warfare? Well, that's what attackers are doing. They're severing their attacks and they're hiding them in specific items in specific places that we're not looking at because we're too busy looking at what's happened before. One thing though, is that Voldemort actually created 7 Horcruxes, one that he actually didn't know about, and that was Harry Potter. Now, Harry Potter was the center of everything in the Harry Potter books, obviously. When we talk about security in the cloud, the center of that story is the cloud. So attackers have made that into a Horcrux itself. Attackers, they're heavily targeting public clouds because there's so much information being stored there. And most of it is sensitive, for example, the things that are held within our databases. But companies have begun switching over to the cloud without putting new strategies for protection in place. We're relying on the things that we've already done. And we'll have attackers that come in and they lay low. They don't attack right when they've managed to breach us. And so it gives us this false sense of security that because we're in the cloud, we're safer than we were before. In 2018 alone, 25% of businesses using the public cloud fell victim to data theft. Now, one key way that attackers are able to do so is they're relying on Horcrux number 6, and that's the diary. Now, Tom Riddle, Voldemort before he was Voldemort, kept a diary, and it contained his memories. It contained pieces of him that he was able to transcend both time and space. Now, in the security world, we stick to the tools that we know. And for example, let's say endpoint protection detected methods. We use these to write our playbooks. These playbooks become canon. We've mapped out exactly how every single environment is going to look, what's going to be installed in every single server, what antivirus programs we're going to use, what exactly is the vendor that we'll be buying from. And we don't allow our security practices, our implementations to grow with our environments. Like, the cloud is a brand new world and it's ephemeral. It's constantly changing. So it's vital that we be willing to change with it, that our security practices, that our security teams continue to grow, and that we don't rely on the diary, on our memories of the past to be able to move into the future. Now, just like Harry Potter was able to destroy the diary with the Basilisk, I don't know how to say anything, all right, guys? Fang, You have to be able to use the right tool for the right job. We rely on endpoint protection. However, endpoint protection is just that. It's something created to protect our endpoints. Using these methodologies that guess at the efficiency of an attack, this gives us increased latency time, and it attempts to contain an attack, not to prevent it. We rely on history. We rely on this diary. What has an attacker done before? What malware have they used? What is the signature for this malware? What is the way that we've seen it behave? This is reactive. It's not proactive. And eventually we get to the point where we don't have visibility into our own code, into our own systems, because we're so bogged down at looking at what was that we're not seeing how our environments are constantly changing. Traditional security methods, they were built to protect web-facing products, but cloud servers now, they're more complex. We're crafting cloud servers to meet the exact needs of our companies. Efficient security, it needs to go beyond the planning stage. We need to have actionable steps at what we're going to do if and when we are breached. Now, the way that attackers are being able to control us so much when it comes to us relying on our previous experience is that they are using the diadem of Ravenclaw. Now, the diadem of Ravenclaw is used to enhance our wisdom. Within our security teams and companies, we have this habit of holding all of our information so close to heart. And it makes sense, right? This is proprietary, this is private information. But what happens when an attack is successful? Well, we keep it hushed. We move in to try to patch everything, to try to find out exactly what occurred, and to patch it before anyone finds out. That doesn't sound so bad, except that we continue to keep it as hushed as possible. We might announce that we were breached, but we tell everybody it's okay, it's been fixed. And we're not going to say anything further because that could possibly help another attacker in the future. Unfortunately, what we're doing, though, is we're keeping information that could be vital for another company to ourselves. And why should that concern you? Because eventually they'll have information that can be vital to your company. History has shown us that attacks, they're reused, that we're able to perhaps learn from another company how to better protect ourselves. And attackers, they're not doing this. Attackers are using that diadem to be able to share additional information with one another. They've adapted to a model where they're not only selling their malware, but they're actually sharing it with one another. They're sharing information about our companies, the reconnaissance that they've had, what was effective in their attack. So this new attacker can take it and aim that attack at someone else. What this has really done in the end is this has put Slytherin's locket around our neck. Now, Slytherin's locket, it had some seriously dark magic protecting it, and it led to some pretty serious mood changes. The necklace, what it does, or the locket, what it does, is it draws out all of our doubts. It draws out our suspicions about others' motives. And this goes beyond one company to another. It brings that doubt into our teams. When we've been breached, and I hate to admit it, what we do is we try to find who was at fault. Who caused this issue? Which team owns it? We do that post-mortem and we say this will be a blameless post-mortem. But more times than not, I don't actually see that going down as blameless. So now we have the security team trying to investigate while under the why didn't you catch this before? And they're going, well, we didn't bring in the vulnerability. Look at the dev team. They're the ones that wrote the code. And the dev teams could be saying, but yes, you're supposed to be protecting it. And look at ops. They didn't implement it correctly. And ops is just sitting there going like, we didn't even know what was running in the system. We didn't know what security practices were trying to be held. We were just trying to keep the servers up. We're turning our teams against each other. And while we're busy with the infighting, busy hiding information, they're winning. They're running amok within our cloud environments. And we're too busy to effectively aim our responses at them. Now, another thing that we do is centered around the ring. Voldemort was quoted, or he said in the book, as saying, "See this? See this? Do you know what it is?" Now, as far back as we came from, for centuries, it's been in our families, and that's how far back we go. Information hoarding has become that attacker's third Horcrux in almost an identical way. I mean, we could easily say, "You see this? You see this? Do you know how long it is? Do you know how many fellow security team members have come before you? Centuries it's been in our company, going back as far as we can remember. It contains thousands and thousands of signatures for us to be able to protect our environments." Ha ha ha. All right, I told you guys I'm a dork. Our reliance on signature-based detection has become one of our greatest weaknesses. We know the Death Eaters are coming, and we know that they have a mark that we can look for. But when we're sitting here looking for the right tattoo, we miss the evolution. We miss when it grows into something much more than what it started for. We monitor for what we know. I mean, we already know that the Death Eater is going to have this tattoo. So we stand there looking at everybody's arm. And then when something which is much scarier, much bigger, and has been developed even further comes by, we say, "Oh, you know what? Nice tattoo. Come on in," because it's not what we were specifically looking for. With signature and behavior-based detection, our security is now becoming reactive instead of proactive. And that's really not what we want to be. We want to be able to spot the evolution of things that are going on. And attackers, they're using this to their advantage. And that brings us to our next Horcrux, Hufflepuff's Cup. Hufflepuff's Cup is protected by a spell that would cause any object that came in contact with it to multiply. And this is really where we're beginning to see the negative impacts of all of the previous Horcruxes, and they're multiplying. I mean, attackers are well aware of what they've created. And we seem to have put the locket into the cup and are just seeing it multiply over and over again. We focus so much on fixing our systems as quietly as possible that we're basically passing out lockets to every team member that we have. We see this increase of amount of time that it's taking for an issue to be fixed, and attackers know this. I mean, it can take up to 187 days for us to be able to find out that we've been breached. And once we know vulnerability, then we have to go through and patch our systems. But before we can do that, we have to wait for the vendor to actually put a patch out. And vendor A might not get the patch out as fast as vendor B. Then we have to wait for our patching window. And everything just keeps cascading into more and more problems. The problems are multiplying. And this whole time, our attackers are sitting back, trading information, letting us know how they successfully made an attack. It's all building up to the point where we're overwhelmed. And that's what leads me to the last Horcrux. Now, after Voldemort's initial downfall, he was able to use Nagini's venom in order to have the perfect ingredient for his potion and be able to regain his strength. Just when we think that we're finally gaining traction, that we're being able to better protect our environments. I mean, the change to the cloud was supposed to be so much better. We were supposed to be able to have that shared responsibility model, and we're supposed to be able to split the stress apart. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case because our attackers had one last potion that they were sitting on, and that is code reuse. Now, one of my favorite people in the cloud, Corey Quinn, once said that there are front-end developers and there are back-end developers. And then there's the rest of us, Stack Overflow developers. Look, our developers are reusing code. This is well known. I mean, if you already have a function that you know works, why wouldn't you reuse it? And we're under deadlines. So when we don't know how to do something, we can go out to Stack Overflow and ask others how it's been done before. We reuse their code. Or sometimes we actually see an answer already there and we just copy and pasta and put it into our code. I promise you, this happens. And we can see code reuse when it comes to different variants of, let's say, WannaCry or Petya or NotPetya. These are probably the most frequently spoken about code reuse examples. Now, when we talk about this, sometimes it's hard for people to understand how common it actually is. And we can see that example in Mirai. Now, our research team came across a series of interesting uploads to VirusTotal. And VirusTotal is actually quite often used by attackers or by vicious or malicious code writers to see if it's detected or not. And so we have these different variants of Mirai that are being updated, all of them within an hour. And you can see that each one has a little less detection. Each one has a little bit less of a detection rate. Here we're watching exactly how developers do their work. They can craft small parts to get the intended results. Well, malicious actors, they can be developers too, and it's the exact same process. Now, I know I've gone through a lot and I've created a pretty dark picture. So what can we do about it? How can we possibly tackle so many issues on top of what we're already seeing every day? Well, I have a secret for you, and that's that I'm not the only wizard in the room. That's right, you're a wizard. I wish I could mention everybody's name. You are a wizard, and the fact is that all you need is the right tools, the right wand. Now, there are several ways for us to be able to protect our environments. We can do pre-runtime scans, and there are benefits to this. For example, well, you can ensure that you're not using up resources in your production environments. It can help reduce known attack surfaces. And the issue, though, is that it only addresses what we know already. Historically, we should all know that we only know a bit of what's actually out there. In fact, it stalls agile work. Our developers have to wait for us to complete these scans before they can actually run things in productions. And right now, with the agile world that we live in, developers are pushing code into production every hour, every minute. For some companies, every few seconds. With this ability to push code so quickly, many of our security teams have no idea what code is actually running on their systems. And with the ephemeral nature of servers and cloud resources, sometimes they're not fully aware of everything that is involved in their environment. So another option that we have is we can rely on runtime scans. These are great because we can detect when known malicious code is being run. It allows us to have that visibility into the code that we've been lacking. However, with some runtime solutions, we also have a drastic impact in resources because it's there running all the time, checking the system over and over. And this increases team workloads. I mean, we have false alerts about what code is running on our system because, you know what, it's not acting the way it really should, but a developer actually changed the code. But you know what, it raises an alert anyways, and I have to investigate it. And then there's the time that it used up too many resources and the system went into swapping, and then we started paging, and then eventually it had a kernel panic and it went down. And all of this lies on the shoulders of your system administrators trying to figure out what actually happened. I can tell you from experience that actual issues fall through the cracks when we're so bogged down with so many alerts. What you need in the end is you need a different way to look at this runtime protection. You need a whole new spell. And sometimes you don't just need a protection spell. Sometimes you need a spell to finish off the issue. Now, to show exactly how you can do this, let's jump in to a fun demo. In July 2020, researchers were able to find a whole new malware payload. Now, it differed from the standard crypto miners that were typically deployed. The malware, which at the time of its discovery was completely undetected by all 60 of VirusTotal's detection engines. It was a backdoor, which we've named Docky. Now, Docky used techniques that were previously undocumented. It used a blockchain wallet for generating command and control domain names. Attackers were then able to set up their own containers, execute the malware on the victim's infrastructure. Now, the image, it was actually available on the Docker Hub, and by itself, it wasn't malicious at all. Now, it was able to take malicious action, and that's because it contained the curl command package. They were then able to use that in order to use a create API request, and the request contained the configuration parameters for the container. One of these parameters was bind. Thus, they were able to take any directory that they wanted it and bind it to the root directory of the host. The script will then download the malware that seeds the command that starts the container. The downloaded Docky, and it triggered a backdoor. Now, I'm somebody that learns visually, so let's hop over to the command line and see how this really works. Host, we can go ahead and launch our Python attack script. We can see that it has successfully completed because it gives us our container ID, and it also lets us know that the container has started. To confirm, let's move over to the victim host. Let's start off our investigation by looking to see what was installed within the temp directory. We can see here that we indeed have a file by the name of downloader. Looking into the file, it basically says, confirm that Docky malware is installed. If it's not, install it. Now let's clear our screen so that we can better see what's occurring. Now let's take a look inside of the root directory. And there you go, we can in fact see Docky malware. And in order to confirm that it is indeed running, we can list out the processes currently running on our system. Now that we know that Docky is indeed running, let's go back over to our Protect dashboard and see what has occurred there. We can see both the host name as well as the path of the file. Now, we don't want this running on our system for too long, so now I really hope that you enjoyed this demo. And I wish I had so much more time to be able to show you all of the different things that I've been learning, all the different types of attacks, looking at living off the land attacks and looking at, suspicious commands. I could go on and on. I am running dangerously close to time, so I want to say thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. Really fascinating presentation there. I think I might have to rewatch the whole Harry Potter series and view it from a completely different perspective. So yeah, thank you for that. We do have about just over 10 minutes for any questions. So we do have a few which have popped up already, but if you do have any questions, do put them through into your question box now. So firstly, what can management do to help bridge communication between the teams?
One thing that I'm not seeing is management actually becoming involved into the day-to-day kind of activity that teams are going through. There seems to be this trickle-down effect. Manager A, let's say the CTO, relies on the management within the team, and then that manager relies on the night shift, and no one really knows what the day-to-day looks like. So what I would love to see is management actually going in and sitting in the trenches. Sit at the nighttime, sit in the daytime, find out what issues they're actually running into. This is the best time to see if, let's say, the developers are having issues even communicating with the security team. Are the security team actually relaying back what's occurring, what they're seeing back to the devs so that they can see? And coming from an ops system administrator background, I can tell you that please excuse the puppies in the background, that we're flying blind. There was code running on the machine. Most of the time we had no idea what it was beyond, processes. We would investigate a little bit and then hand it back to the security team. And we never had anything handed back to us, and so that we could, really act if we saw it again. So really that's what management can do. Management needs to rely on more than just reports being given to them. They need to go sit with the teams and see what day-to-day really is.
Of course, yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And do you think that DevSecOps can be successfully implemented in most companies?
That's a hard question because it really relies on the culture of the company. Do we have companies who are making communication, making the workflow between teams effectively? And are they really having these blameless postmortems? I talk to developers, I talk to security teams all of the time that are afraid to admit the mistakes that occurred. And because of this, it's difficult for the teams to have communication. I mean, if you've noticed, I keep saying that, and communication is really key. We have what we call, security unicorns that have been able to really implement all of these practices. And except, you know what, something happened. Maybe we had, losses because of it in revenue, but I don't want to say that it's okay, but we want to say what it happened. Let's kind of build a ground so that we can continue on and not have it happen again. So yes, it's possible, but it's going to be difficult for most companies.
Fine, of course. Yeah, makes sense. And in terms of open source code, is this something that needs to be reevaluated?
Yes and no. The use of open source code, I think, is great. Giving back to the community. I worked within OpenStack for an extended period of time, and this is how the product occurred. It was all about the kindness of developers who were dedicating their time. The trust that we have in open source code needs to change. We have this view that it's more secure because we have all of these eyes on it, but for every developer that is contributing, there's a whole new line of possible vulnerabilities. When it comes to malware, we really are looking for that concept of, the code reuse, but we're seeing it really morph. One thing that we're really noticing right now is the transition into Golang. We recently, actually on Thursday, we're holding a webinar about a new threat that we've discovered called ElectroRat. And the cyber criminal there was able to effectively build applications and promote them as businesses in order to steal, crypto wallets. And because it was written in Golang, and it's kind of a new frontier here.
Of course, yeah. Well, thank you for that. I think that's probably all we have time for now because we're almost hitting our time limit. But Elle, thank you so much for that. Thank you for joining us. It's a real pleasure having you here. It's a fascinating presentation. Don't think I've seen one compared to Harry Potter before. So yeah, brilliant. Thanks a lot for that. And of course, thank you for the questions at the end as well.